My name is Mallory, and I am 74 years old. For 50 of those years, I've lived in this house. My late husband Robert and I bought it when the ink on our marriage license was barely dry, and the oak tree in the front yard was nothing more than a sapling. I've seen that tree grow strong enough to withstand hurricanes, blizzards, and the weight of a dozen neighborhood children climbing its branches. But last Tuesday, a storm with a particular fury, a wild, green-skied monster of a thing, finally managed what decades of lesser tempests could not. It tore one of the oldest, thickest limbs from that oak and sent it crashing through the roof of my sunroom. The sound was like the world splitting in two. For a moment, I thought the house itself had died. When the rain stopped and I could finally inspect the damage, my heart sank. The gash in the roof was obscene, a gaping wound open to the sky. Rain had poured in for hours, ruining the hardwood floors. Robert had installed himself, warping the antique desk that had belonged to my grandmother, and soaking boxes of old photographs I'd always meant to digitize. But even as I stood there, smelling the damp plaster and the raw, wet scent of splintered wood, a part of me wasn't panicking. I was sad, yes, but I was secure, because for 42 years I had been a loyal customer of Patriot Mutual Assurance. More than a customer, in fact. I had paid my premiums on time, every single month, for half a century. I knew my policy inside and out. I had what they called the Ironclad Comprehensive Plan. I should know. I helped name it. So I made the call, filed the claim, and waited, confident that the company I'd given my entire professional life to would be there for me in my moment of need. That was my first mistake. My second was underestimating the profound, almost breathtaking arrogance of the very young. The young man who arrived 2 days later could not have been a more perfect caricature of youthful overconfidence if a Hollywood casting director had sent him. His name, he announced with a crisp, unearned authority, was Jason. He wore a suit that was a size too big in the shoulders and a shade of charcoal gray that tried for serious professionals but landed closer to high school prom. He carried a tablet in one hand and a clipboard in the other, a digital-analog combination that spoke of a deep insecurity, as if he needed to be armed with every possible tool of bureaucracy. He walked around my ruined sunroom with a practiced air of solemnity, but his eyes, quick and dismissive, told a different story. They weren't seeing a lifetime of memories soaked and destroyed. They were cataloging liabilities and looking for outs. He barely looked at me as he spoke, his attention fixed on his tablet. He had this infuriating habit of speaking to me in slow, deliberate, over-enunciated tones, as if I were not only elderly, but also hard of hearing, and perhaps a bit dim. He'd point to the gaping hole and say, "Now, ma'am, this is the primary point of water ingress." I just nodded, a quiet, grandmotherly type in a floral house dress, letting him play his part. I let him poke at the warped floorboards with the toe of his shiny, scuffed shoe. I let him take his pictures and tap his little notes into his device. I was patient. My late husband, Robert, used to say I had the patience of a sequoia, that I could outweight stone. He was right. I knew what was coming, and I wanted to give Jason all the rope he needed. Finally, he straightened up, puffed out his chest, and gave me what I'm sure he thought was a sympathetic but firm look. It was a look he'd probably practiced in the mirror. "Well, Mallory," he said, using my first name with a familiarity that set my teeth on edge. "I've reviewed the preliminary data and cross-referenced it with your policy." He paused for dramatic effect. "Unfortunately, this kind of event, it isn't going to be covered." I kept my face placid, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I just looked at him. "Oh, and why is that, young man?" He seemed relieved that I wasn't hysterical, that I was taking the bad news so well. It emboldened him. He launched into his script, the condescension dripping from every word. You see, your policy, like most standard homeowners' policies, contains an exclusion for what we call acts of God. He said the phrase as if it were some arcane legal concept I couldn't possibly comprehend. A storm of this magnitude, the high winds, a tree falling. It's a classic example. It's an event of nature, completely outside of human control. The company simply can't be held responsible for something like that. It's an act of God. He smiled, a tight little corporate smile that didn't reach his eyes. He thought he was done. He thought he was done. He thought he had delivered the bad news with a professional, unassailable finality. He had checked his boxes. He had closed the case. He had no idea who he was talking to. He didn't know that I was Mallory Dean, not just a policyholder. He didn't know that in 1978, I was one of only 3 female senior agents at Patriot Mutual's national headquarters. He didn't know that I sat in a stuffy, smoke-filled boardroom for 6 weeks, arguing with a dozen men in gray suits over the precise wording of the comprehensive peril clause. He didn't know that I was the one who had successfully fought to have the vague, useless, and legally cowardly phrase, act of God, struck from the policy language and replaced with a clearly defined list of covered perils. Wind damage was covered, hail was covered, falling objects, including trees and their limbs, were explicitly, unequivocally covered. He was quoting a phantom clause from a version of the policy that hadn't existed in 40 years, a ghost of a loophole I myself had personally exercised. My next call wasn't going to be to the appeals department to get lost in a bureaucratic maze. No, my next call was going to be to the CEO, a man I hadn't spoken to in 15 years, a brilliant, shy young man I'd taken under my wing 30 years ago and personally mentored, a man named Arthur Vance. I had a strong suspicion that young Jason was about to receive the most thorough and expensive education of his short, unimpressive career, an education in contract law, corporate history, and the fine art of knowing when to shut your mouth. After Jason left, a little cloud of smug satisfaction trailing behind him like cheap cologne, the silence of the house settled back in. But it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a familiar home. It was the heavy, oppressive silence of insult added to injury. I walked back into the sunroom and stood before the wreckage. The smell of damp earth from the uprooted oak limb mingled with the sickly, sweet scent of decay from the waterlogged wood and plaster. I reached out and touched the frame of a photograph on the warped desk. It was of me and Robert on our honeymoon in the Blue Ridge Mountains, both of us young and impossibly happy, squinting into a future that seemed as wide and clear as the sky behind us. The water had seeped under the glass, blurring Robert's smile into a watery smudge, and that's when the anger, a feeling I hadn't truly felt in years, began to smolder. It wasn't a hot, flashing anger. It was a cold, deep, and heavy thing, settling in my bones like a winter chill. It was the injustice of it all, not just the storm, but the casual, dismissive cruelty of that boy. Acts of God. He'd said it with such finality, as if it were a divine decree. For a moment, the 74-year-old woman in the floral dress faded away, and in her place was the 30-year-old Mallory Dean, striding through the halls of Patriot Mutual in a sharp pantsuit, a leather briefcase in her hand, ready for a fight. My mind slipped back through the decades, the memories as vivid and sharp as the day they were made. I was back in the main underwriting floor of Patriot Mutual in 1973. It was a vast open room, a sea of identical steel gray desks, each occupied by a man in a white shirt and a narrow tie The air was thick with the scent of mimeograph fluid, stale coffee, and a constant haze of cigar and cigarette smoke that clung to your hair and clothes. There were women there, of course, dozens of them, in the typing pool, a clattering, segregated corner of the floor, where they transformed the agent's scrawled notes into pristine documents. But on the main floor, among the agents and underwriters who made the actual decisions, there was only one woman. My desk was tucked away in a corner, right by the noisy radiators, as if they weren't quite sure what to do with me. The men weren't overtly hostile, not most of them anyway. It was more of a pervasive, low-grade condescension. They called me sweetheart and honey. They asked me to fetch them coffee, assuming I was a secretary who had somehow gotten lost. When I landed my first major commercial account, a textile factory everyone else had written off as a bad risk, my direct supervisor, a portly man named Bill Peterson, had clapped me on the back and said, "Well, I'll be, the little lady has claws." He meant it as a compliment. I smiled, a tight practice smile, and went back to my desk, my knuckles white as I gripped my pen. I learned early on that getting angry was a luxury I couldn't afford. Anger made a man seem passionate. It made a woman seem hysterical, so I channeled it. I channeled it into work. I learned every policy, every exclusion, every rider, until I knew them better than anyone else. I learned to be smarter, faster, and more prepared than every man in that room, because I had to be. My competence was my only armor. And then I was in 1978, in the oak-paneled boardroom on the executive floor. The air conditioning hummed, a blessed relief from the smoke-filled pit downstairs. I was there because Mr. Abernathy, the company's founder and then CEO, had taken a notice of my work. He was a formidable man, old school and tough as nails, but he was fair. He valued competence above all else, and he didn't care what it looked like. He had tasked a committee with rewriting the company's flagship homeowners policy to make it the best in the industry, and he had personally insisted I be on it. I can still see the faces of the other committee members, all senior VPs, all men in their 50s and 60s. When I first spoke, presenting my argument for eliminating the act of God clause, a wave of polite amusement rippled through the room. Now Mallory, one of them, a silver-haired man named Thompson, had said, leaning back in his leather chair, "That clause is standard in every policy in America. It's a cornerstone of insurance law. It protects the company from catastrophic, unpredictable events." I stood my ground. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I kept my voice even and low. "With all due respect, Mr. Thompson," I said, "it's not a cornerstone. It's a crutch. It's vague. It's subjective, and it is used more often than not to deny legitimate claims from honest people who believe they are protected. We are in the business of predicting the unpredictable. That is the very definition of insurance. If a tornado tears a roof off a house, the homeowner doesn't care if God or the devil sent it. They care that they paid us a premium to protect them from the consequences of high winds. Our promise shouldn't be conditional on the whims of meteorology or theology. It should be a contract, clear and simple. If we promise to cover damage from falling objects, then a tree limb is a falling object, period. I had come prepared. I had a folio of legal precedents, articles and data from other companies. I argued for weeks. Every day was a battle. They'd dismiss my points, and I'd come back the next day with more data. Robert was my rock during that time. I'd come home exhausted and frustrated, and he'd have dinner waiting. He'd listen for hours as I paced our little living room, rehearsing my arguments. He wasn't in insurance. He was a history teacher, but he understood the principle. "You're not just fighting for a clause in a contract, Mal," he told me one night. You're fighting for the soul of the place. Don't you ever let them forget that. And in the end, I won. Mr. Abernathy, who had been listening silently for weeks, finally slammed his hand on the table. She's right, he boomed. The phrase is a weasel's way out. Get rid of it. Let's sell a policy we can actually stand behind. The new section was called the Comprehensive Name Peril Clause, and it was my work. My legacy etched into the very DNA of the company, a promise I had personally crafted, a promise that Jason, with his ill-fitting suit and smug smile, had just tried to spit on. My thoughts snapped back to the present just as there was a soft knock on my front door. It was my next-door neighbor, Carol. She was a sweet woman, a widow of a few years, who lived alone in the little blue house she and her husband had shared for 40 years. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was clutching a piece of paper in her hand, as if it were a snake. "Mallory, I am so sorry to bother you," she said, her voice trembling. "I saw the truck from the insurance company leave your place. Did you hear from them?" "I did, Carol. Come in," I said, ushering her into the kitchen, away from the depressing sight of the sunroom. She sank into a chair at my kitchen table and flattened the paper out in front of her. It was a letter from Patriot Mutual Assurance. "They denied it," she whispered, her voice cracking. "The storm tore half the shingles off my garage roof. The adjuster said. He said it was a maintenance issue. He said the roof was too old, and that proper upkeep would have prevented the loss. Mallory, my Frank just had that roof redone 5 years ago. I have the receipts. What am I going to do? I don't have thousands of dollars to fix it." I looked at the letter. It was signed by a different adjuster, but the language was the same sterile corporate doublespeak. It was another flimsy excuse, another bad faith denial designed to protect the bottom line. I felt that cold anger inside me solidify into something hard and sharp, like a diamond. This wasn't just about my sunroom anymore. It wasn't just about some arrogant kid named Jason. It was a sickness, a rot that had set in at the heart of my company. They were systematically betraying the very people they had promised to protect, the elderly, the vulnerable, the ones who trusted them most. My mind flashed to another memory, this one of a much younger man, Arthur Vance. He had been a summer intern, fresh out of business school, assigned to my department in the late 80s. He was brilliant with numbers, a true prodigy with actuarial tables, but he was painfully shy and awkward. He couldn't look anyone in the eye and mumbled when he spoke. The other senior agents dismissed him as a socially inept nerd, but I saw something else in him. I saw a keen mind, and buried under all that awkwardness, a good heart. I took him on as a special project. I didn't just teach him the technical side of the business. I taught him the human side. I made him come with me on client visits. I made him sit with families who had lost everything in a fire and listen to their stories. One day, after visiting a family whose claim was being held up by a technicality, he was visibly upset. "It's not right, Mrs. Dean," he had mumbled, staring at his shoes. "The policy says we could deny it, but it's just not right." I put a hand on his shoulder. "Arthur, never forget that feeling. This business isn't about numbers and clauses. It's about people. It's about a promise. The day we start looking for ways not to pay a claim, instead of ways to pay one, is the day we cease to be an insurance company and become something else entirely, something ugly." He looked up at me then, really looked at me for the first time. "Abernathy's promise," he said, repeating a phrase I often used, a reference to the founder's ethos. "Exactly," I said, "Abernathy's promise." Looking at Carol's tear-streaked face, at the official letterhead of the company I had loved, I knew what I had to do. The promise had been broken. The sickness had taken root. It wasn't about revenge, until it was, but it was a specific kind of revenge. not a fiery, destructive one, but a cold, precise, and corrective one. I was going to remind Patriot Mutual, from the CEO's office all the way down to the mailroom, what a promise meant. I stood up and went to the old roll-top desk in my study, the one, thankfully, in the undamaged part of the house. I opened a small locked drawer and pulled out a leather-bound address book I hadn't looked at in a decade. I flipped through the pages, past the names of old friends and colleagues, many of whom were long gone, until I found the entry I was looking for. Vance, Arthur, private line. Before I picked up the phone, I knew I couldn't just rely on an old friendship or a shared memory. Arthur was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation now. He would be surrounded by lawyers and handlers whose entire job was to insulate him from problems like me. A call out of the blue about a denied claim, even from an old mentor, could easily be deflected, passed down to a subordinate, and buried in paperwork. No, if I was going to do this, I needed to do it right. I needed to approach this not as a scorned old woman, but as the formidable agent I once was. I needed leverage. I needed evidence. I needed a strategy. My first stop was the attic, up in the dry, dusty heat. Stored in a heavy cedar chest that Robert had built, was my entire professional life. I hadn't opened it in years. The scent of old paper and cedar filled the air as I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, beneath my old service awards and a framed photo of my retirement party, were stacks of meticulously organized manila folders. I pulled out the one labeled EPMA Policy Development 1975 to 1980. My heart gave a little flutter. There it was, not just copies, but some of my original working drafts of the comprehensive named peril clause. Pages of my own neat cursive handwriting, full of crossed-out words and margin notes. And stapled to the final version was a memo from Mr. Abernathy himself, on his personal letterhead. It read, "Mallory, excellent work. This is the new standard. Clear, fair, and ironclad. Let's make this the Patriot way." This wasn't just a memory, it was a foundational document of the company. It was the stone tablet on which the law had been written. But that wasn't all. I dug deeper, past old performance reviews that glowed with praise, and found another treasure. In the late 70s, long before everything was digitized, our most important archival documents were stored on microfiche. Being a bit of a pack rat and deeply distrustful of new technologies I couldn't physically hold, I had kept not only my personal copies of key documents, but also the old clunky microfiche reader from my office when they upgraded the department. Robert had laughed at me for hauling the heavy thing home, but I insisted it might be useful one day. Today was that day. I spent the next hour hunched over the glowing screen, the machine humming a song of the past, scrolling through archived board meeting minutes from 1978. And there it was, clear as day, motion to approve revised homeowners policy language as proposed by M. Dean, unanimously carried. I printed out a dozen pages, the evidence stacking up on my desk. My next step was to understand the enemy. I sat down at my computer, the modern equivalent of my old microfiche reader, and began to dig into the current state of Patriot Mutual. I read their last 2 annual reports, shareholder meeting transcripts, and press releases. A name kept popping up in relation to operational streamlining and cost containment initiatives: Cynthia Drake, the executive vice president for North American claims. Her corporate headshot showed a woman in her late 40s with a severe haircut and a smile that looked like it had been chiseled from ice. Her philosophy, praised in the reports for improving quarterly profits, seemed to be centered on aggressive claim management. It was a sterile corporate way of saying deny, deny, deny. Jason wasn't a rogue agent. He was a foot soldier, trained and deployed in Cynthia Drake's war on expenses. He was a symptom of the disease she had introduced into the company's bloodstream. This was crucial. It meant my fight wasn't with a clueless kid. It was with a systemic policy that directly contradicted the one I had helped create. It was a betrayal, not just of a customer, but of the company's own history. Then I turned my attention back to my community. I called Carol. Carol, I said, my voice firm and confident. I have a bit of a plan, but I need your help. You mentioned other people in the neighborhood were having trouble with Patriot Mutual. Oh yes, she said. The neighborhood Facebook group is full of it. At least 5 other families on our street alone have been denied for the storm damage. Everyone's furious. Good, I said. Now I want you to do something for me, but it has to be discreet. I don't want you to cause a panic or start a crusade just yet. I just want you to collect some information. Names, policy numbers, if they're willing to share, and a brief description of the damage and the reason for denial. Just tell them a neighbor who used to work in the industry is looking into a pattern and might be able to offer some advice. Can you do that for me? There was a pause on the line. Mallory, are you sure? I don't want to get anyone in more trouble. Carol was a kind soul, not a fighter. I am absolutely sure, I said, my voice softening. Carol, these people are bullies. They are counting on us being old, or scared, or too tired to fight back. They are counting on us not talking to each other. We are going to show them they made a serious miscalculation. I promise you, no one will get in trouble. In fact, I have a feeling things are about to get much, much better for all of you. Reassured, she agreed. Over the next 2 days, my email inbox started to fill up. Carol was a surprisingly effective intelligence gatherer. I had a list of 9 other families in a 5-block radius, all loyal Patriot Mutual customers, all with legitimate storm claims, and all denied for a variety of flimsy, insulting reasons. One was denied because the type of shingle on their roof was no longer supported. Another was told the tree that fell on their fence was a neighboring property issues, even though the tree was on their own land. It was a clear, undeniable pattern of bad faith denials. I compiled everything into a single, devastatingly professional dossier. I created a cover sheet titled In Re Systemic Breach of Contract and Bad Faith Claim Denials, Drake Region Q3. I included a summary of my own claim, Jason's act of God nonsense, and a detailed analysis of why it was a breach of the policy I had written. I then attached Mr. Abernathy's memo, the board meeting minutes, and the list of the other 9 wronged homeowners, complete with their contact information and claim details. I now held in my hands a package of pure, cold, irrefutable leverage. This was no longer a simple complaint. This was evidence of a systemic and likely illegal corporate strategy that was causing direct harm to its most loyal customers. This wasn't just a problem for some regional VP. This was a reputational and legal nightmare that went all the way to the top. It was a direct threat to Arthur Vance's public image as a principled, customer-focused leader, an image I had helped him build. Now, and only now, was I ready to make the call. I sat at my desk, the dossier laid out before me, took a deep, steadying breath, and dialed the number. The phone rang 3 times before a crisp, professional voice answered. Office of the CEO, Arthur Vance speaking. It was his executive assistant, a gatekeeper whose job was to deflect and manage. Hello, I said calmly. I'd like to speak with Mr. Vance, please. My name is Mallory Dean. Is he expecting your call? The voice asked, a hint of polite skepticism in her tone. No, he is not, I replied, but I believe he will want to take it. Please tell him that Mallory Dean is calling about Abernathy's promise. There was a short, sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a beat of silence. That phrase wasn't in any corporate handbook. It wasn't a project name or a client account. It was a piece of oral history, a code phrase from a different era. "One moment, Miss Dean," the assistant said, her tone suddenly deferential. I was on hold for less than 30 seconds before the line clicked, and a familiar voice, deeper now, but still with that same thoughtful cadence, came on. "Mallory, is that really you?" "It is, Arthur," I said. "It's been a long time." "It has," he said, a genuine warmth in his voice. "Too long. How are you? What's going on? Is everything all right?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I knew the clock was ticking before the CEO mindset would take over completely. "I'm afraid not, Arthur. I have a problem, and unfortunately, it's with your company." And then I laid it all out. I told him about the storm, the damage to my house, and the visit from the young man named Jason. I spoke in a calm, factual tone, the one I used to use in depositions. I recited the section and paragraph of the comprehensive named peril clause from memory. Then I repeated Jason's words back to him. He told me my policy doesn't cover acts of God. There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the CEO brain warring with the memory of the young man I had mentored. I could picture him in his vast corner office, with its panoramic view of the city, the warmth draining from his face. "He said what?" Arthur's voice was low, tight and dangerous. "An act of God, Arthur. In a Patriot Mutual policy. Can you imagine?" I let the question hang in the air. Then I delivered the next blow. "But this isn't just about me. My neighbor Carol, a widow on a fixed income, had her claim for a damaged garage roof denied on the grounds of improper maintenance for a roof that's only 5 years old. And there are at least 9 other families in my immediate neighborhood with similar stories, all long-term policyholders, all denied for what appear to be fabricated reasons." I heard him exhale, a sharp, frustrated sound. "Cynthia Drake," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Her cost containment program." "So you know about it," I stated. It wasn't a question. "Then you should also know that I have in my possession my original working drafts of the CNP clause, the board minutes approving it, and a signed memo from Mr. Abernathy himself, praising its fairness and clarity. I also have a list of every wronged homeowner I've found so far. It seems your company is engaging in a pattern of systemic bad faith, Arthur. A pattern that is not only a breach of contract, but a betrayal of the very principles this company was built on. A betrayal of Abernathy's promise." The silence on the line was now so profound, I could hear the faint hum of the electrical current. Arthur wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was the guardian of a legacy, and I had just shown him that the temple was being desecrated by his own priests. "Mallory," he finally said, and his voice was cold steel, "where are you right now?" "I'm at home," I said. "Don't go anywhere. Don't talk to anyone else from the company. I will handle this personally. You have my word. I need to make some calls. I will call you back." The line went dead. I gently placed the receiver back in its cradle. The first move had been made. The silent takeover had begun. I couldn't see it, but I could feel the shockwave I had just sent out from my quiet little house, racing across the country to that glass tower downtown. I imagined the frantic phone calls, the hurried meetings, the dawning panic. I pictured Jason, probably out for a celebratory lunch with his fellow adjusters, bragging about how he'd saved the company money by shutting down some old lady's claim. I pictured his phone ringing, his supervisor's name flashing on the screen. I pictured the color draining from his face as his boss, in a panicked rage, screamed at him down the line. "What in God's name did you say to Mallory Dean?" A name he wouldn't have recognized. A name that in the space of a single phone call had just become the most terrifying name in his world. The fallout was faster and more spectacular than I could have imagined. It began the very next morning. A sleek black town car, the kind CEOs use, pulled up in front of Carol's little blue house. A woman in a sharp, expensive suit got out, looking profoundly out of place on our quiet suburban street. Carol called me a few minutes later, her voice a mixture of terror and awe. "Mallory, you will not believe this," she stammered. "That was the senior vice president of claims from the corporate office." She apologized profusely. She said my claim had been mishandled due to a clerical errors at the regional level. She handed me a check, Mallory, a check for the full amount to repair the garage, plus another $5,000 for the distress and inconvenience, and she said a roofing crew would be here tomorrow morning to start work billed directly to the company. I smiled. "I believe it, Carol. I believe it completely." "But how?" she asked, her voice full of wonder. "What did you do?" "I just made sure the right people were reminded of a promise they made a long time ago," I said. "That was only the beginning." News of Carol's sudden miraculous reversal spread through the neighborhood Facebook group like wildfire. People were initially skeptical, thinking it was a one-off fluke. But then, an hour later, another family, the Millers down the street, posted a frantic update. They had received a similar call, a similar apology, and a similar promise of immediate payment from a high-level executive. And then another, and another. All day the stories poured in. Each of the 9 families on my list received a personal call from someone at the executive level. Their bogus denials were overturned, their claims approved, and in every case they were offered additional compensation for their trouble. It was a full-scale corporate retreat, executed with surgical precision. What Arthur was doing was brilliant. He wasn't just fixing my problem, he was cauterizing the wound. By proactively reaching out to every single person on my list, he was cutting off any possibility of a class action lawsuit at the knees. He was demonstrating, in the most public way possible, that the problem was not the company, but a rogue element within it that he was now rooting out. He was seizing control of the narrative, and in doing so, he was transforming me from a potential legal adversary into a community hero. My phone didn't stop ringing all day. Neighbors I'd only ever waved to were calling to thank me, their voices thick with relief and gratitude. Meanwhile, I could only imagine the pandemonium at the regional office and at corporate headquarters. In my mind's eye, I saw Cynthia Drake, the architect of the cost containment strategy, being summoned to Arthur's office. I pictured her walking in, confident and severe, ready to defend her profit-boosting numbers, only to be confronted with a copy of my dossier. I saw her trying to shift the blame, to paint Jason as an overzealous rookie who misinterpreted her directives. A classic corporate maneuver, sacrifice the pawn to save the queen. And I pictured Jason. Oh, I spent a lot of time picturing Jason. I imagined him being called into his supervisor's office, thinking it was for a commendation. I saw the door close, the blinds being drawn. I saw the color drain from his face, as he was told that not only was the claim he denied being paid in full, but that the old ladies he had patronized was, in fact, a revered figure in the company's history with a direct line to the CEO. I imagined his world tilting on its axis, the smug certainty of his youth shattering into a million pieces. The moment he realized he wasn't a hotshot agent on the rise, he was a scapegoat in an ill-fitting suit, the designated fall guy for a crisis he had unwittingly triggered. The power had shifted completely. The quiet old woman in the floral dress now held all the cards, and the mighty corporation was scrambling to fall in line. 2 days after my call to Arthur, he called me back. His voice was weary but resolute. "Mallory, the internal audit of the Drake region is underway. It's worse than we thought. It seems this cost containment strategy was more like a deny everything and hope they go away strategy. Cynthia Drake and her immediate team have been placed on administrative leave pending the results of the investigation. He paused, which is a corporate way of saying they are currently cleaning out their desks. I see, I said simply. I have also dealt with the young man, Jason. He continued. His employment with Patriot Mutual has been terminated, effective immediately. That's a shame, I said, and I almost meant it. He was just a soldier following bad orders. Perhaps Arthur conceded, but a soldier still has a duty to understand the mission. And our mission is not what he was doing, which brings me to the reason I'm calling. I've approved your claim, of course. A check for the full estimated repairs, plus a discretionary fund for any overages, and to replace your damaged antiques and floors, is being couriered to you as we speak. But that's not enough. I've failed, Mallory. I let the company culture drift away from what you and Mr. Abernathy built. I got so focused on stock prices and market share that I forgot to inspect the engine room, he sighed. I want to ask you for a favor. A big one. I want you to come back. Not as an employee, but as a paid consultant. I want you to head a new initiative, a complete overhaul of our adjuster training program. I want you to teach the new generation what this company is supposed to stand for. I want you to teach them about Abernathy's promise. I was silent for a moment. Stunned, it was more than I had ever expected. Arthur, I'm 74 years old. I'm retired. You're Mallory Dean, he countered. And you're the only one I trust to do this. But there's one more thing. I feel it's important for there to be a final resolution. A learning opportunity. I'd like to come and see the damage for myself tomorrow morning. And I'd like to bring someone with me. Who? I asked. Though I already had a sinking feeling I knew the answer. Jason, he said. I think he needs to see you again, and I think he needs to listen. The next morning, the black town car pulled up in front of my house precisely at 9 o'clock. Arthur Vance got out of the back. He looked older than I remembered, the weight of his position etched in fine lines around his eyes, but he still had that same thoughtful, serious expression. He was alone. He came up the walk and took both of my hands in his. Mallory, he said, his voice full of a sincerity that transcended the corporate world he inhabited. I am so sorry for the damage, for the insult, for what my company put you and your neighbors through. This is my failure. You're fixing it, Arthur, I said quietly. That's what matters. He walked into the sunroom and just stood there for a long moment, taking in the gaping hole, the ruined floors, the general devastation. He ran a hand through his hair. To think, he whispered, that we did this. The storm broke your house, but we broke our promise. He turned back to me. He's in the car. Are you ready? I nodded. Arthur went to the door and beckoned. A moment later, Jason emerged from the town car. If he had looked like a boy playing dress-up before, now he just looked like a boy. The arrogant suit was gone, replaced by a rumpled shirt and slacks. His face was pale and blotchy, and he couldn't seem to meet my eyes. He shuffled into the room and stood there, his hands clasped in front of him, staring at the floor like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. Arthur's voice was devoid of all warmth. Jason, look at Mrs. Dean. Slowly, reluctantly, Jason raised his head. His eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and shame. Now, Arthur said, his voice like flint, you're not here to apologize. An apology from you at this point is meaningless. You are here to receive an education that you were clearly never given. He turned to me. Mallory, the floor is yours. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I simply walked over to my desk and picked up a single sheet of paper. It was the printout of the policy draft, with Mr. Abernathy's memo stapled to it. Jason, I began, my voice calm and even, like a teacher in a classroom. 2 days ago you stood in this very spot and told me my policy did not cover acts of God. I want to tell you a story. And so I did. I told him about the Patriot Mutual of the 1970s. I told him about the smoke-filled rooms and the wall of men who thought I was there to get them coffee. I told him about the 6-week battle in the boardroom. I explained the legal and ethical bankruptcy of a clause designed to create loopholes rather than provide security. I showed him the memo from the company's founder. This policy, I said, tapping the paper, is not just a document, it is a promise. It is a declaration of principles. It says that we will be there when the storm comes. We don't get to quibble about the nature of the wind. We don't get to abdicate our responsibility by blaming it on a higher power. We made a promise, and we took money for that promise. Your job, your only job, was to honor it. I looked directly at him, and for the first time, he held my gaze. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not just fear, but a dawning, horrified understanding. He hadn't just misinterpreted a clause. He had been an agent of a deep and profound betrayal, not just to me, but to the very history of the institution that had employed him. Your career at this company is over, I said, my voice softening slightly. But you're a young man. You will have other jobs. Let me give you some advice that will serve you better than anything you learned in your training seminars. Before you ever again presume to tell someone what the rules are, you'd better be damn sure you know who wrote them. Jason just stood there, speechless. A single tear traced a path down his pale cheek. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it. There was nothing to say. The lesson was complete. Arthur gave a slight nod, and the young man turned and walked out of my house, his shoulders slumped in defeat, a ghost leaving the scene of his own haunting. Arthur then handed me a thick envelope. Your check, he said, and a consulting contract. Name your price, Mallory. Whatever it is, it's a bargain for what you're about to save this company from itself. The new reality had settled. The house would be fixed. The company was on a new, or rather an old path. And I, in my 74th year, had a new job. 6 months had passed. The sunroom is more beautiful now than it was before. A master carpenter, paid for by Patriot Mutual, replicated Robert's original flooring perfectly. The new desk is a beautiful piece of cherry wood, and the old water-stained photographs have been professionally restored. The great oak in the yard has a scar where the limb used to be, but it's healing, and new growth is already sprouting around it. Life, it seems, has a way of repairing itself if you give it the right tools. Last week, I stood at a podium in a state-of-the-art auditorium at the Patriot Mutual headquarters. I was addressing the newest class of claims adjusters. They were all young, bright-eyed, and eager, just like Jason had been, but they were getting a different kind of education. I didn't talk to them about cost containment or liability shifting. I told them the story of a young woman in a pantsuit walking into a boardroom of skeptics. I told them about a promise made, a promise that became a policy. I told them that their job was not to be gatekeepers, but to be helpers. Their job was to find a way to say yes. After the session, a young woman came up to me, her notebook in her hand. Mrs. Dean, she said, her eyes shining with earnestness, that was the most inspiring thing I've ever heard. No one has ever talked about the history, the soul of the company before. I just smiled. Well, I said, sometimes the old stories are the most important ones. It was never really about the money, you know. It was about respect. It was about the casual, corrosive way society can sometimes dismiss the elderly, assuming we are frail, or ignorant, or powerless. They see the gray hair and the wrinkles, and they forget that those things are earned. They are a testament to a life lived, to battles fought and won, to knowledge accumulated, one day, one year, one decade at a time. They looked at me and saw a frail old woman in a ruined house. They forgot that old women are the ones who know where all the bodies are buried. They forgot that we are the ones who help draw the maps. So what's the moral of my story? I suppose it's this: never underestimate the person standing in front of you. You have no idea what they've done, what they know, or who they've taught. And perhaps more importantly, hold on to your history, whether it's your personal history or the history of a company or a country. It is the source of your strength and your principles. The moment you forget where you came from is the moment you get lost. As for young Jason, I don't know what happened to him, but I truly do, that he learned his lesson. I hope he learned that integrity is not a line item on a balance sheet, and that sometimes the most powerful force of nature isn't the storm that tears down your roof, but the quiet, determined woman standing in the ruins. Thank you for listening to my story today. It just goes to show you that a little bit of knowledge and a whole lot of history can be a powerful thing. Have you ever had an experience where someone underestimated you because of your age or appearance? I'd love to read about it in the comments below. Your stories matter, and sharing them reminds us all that we're not alone. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel for more stories of justice and vindication. And remember to hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Until next time, stay strong and make sure you know your own history. You never know when you might need it.